Well, good evening, sisters and brothers across the state of Tennessee, and maybe even across the country. I want to welcome you to the African American Clergy Coalition of Tennessee, or Collective of Tennessee Leadership Summit, where we have sought to bring together leaders of faith and justice across this state in order to craft an agenda, not just for African Americans, but for the good of all people in this state. And as we connect tonight, we are grateful for you joining in with us. And I would that you would help us spread the word. So if you're logged in right now, I want you to share this on your page and invite others to join with us during this time that I believe will be informative and will be instructive. In just a few moments, I'm going to be sharing objectives of what we plan to do throughout the course of this evening and in the months that are ahead as we seek to work together towards equity and justice in this state. I'm grateful for persons who joined me from the city of Memphis, Nashville, Jackson, Tennessee, as well as Chattanooga, Knoxville, and all points in between. We're grateful for our coming together on this evening. And as we're gathered together on this evening, I want to just share with you what are some of the goals of why we've gathered together in this way. First, we've gathered on this evening to cut clear issues that are impacting what I consider to be human flourishing in Tennessee, and particularly that affect Black lives. And so out of this evening, we want to get clarity on what are the issues that are impacting African-American persons. And we've got some sense of what those things are. But we want to talk these things out and get some clarity about what they are. The second reason that we have gathered is to shape these issues into an agenda from which public policy can be composed, that will be advanced by our state legislators. And so it's not that we have gathered just to talk about the issues, not to just share our sentiments, but constructively, we want to work towards public policy that's going to shape the direction of our state in the years that are to come. And the third reason which we have connected on this evening is to organize and mobilize Black organizations and Black people to lobby and champion the issues across the state and among the Tennessee General Assembly until we have moved the needle, until we have realized change, and until victory is won. And so we're grateful that you have connected with us. And again, if you have not shared, please share now. Change is coming to Tennessee, and I hope that you'll be a part of it. On this evening, there are a number of topics that we will hear from persons who we believe are experts, who are grounded in this work, who are going to guide us through conversation and share with us what are some of the pertinent and relevant ideas within the issues that we're concerned about. And so on this evening, we'll talk about issues from education access to neighborhood and the built environment. We'll talk about healthcare access, social and community context. We will even talk about economic stability. And so I hope that you will stay tuned in on this evening. I hope you'll invite others to come and be a part of what we have gathered together to do on this evening. I know I jumped right into it, so let me just tell you who I am. I'm J. Lawrence Turner. I'm the senior pastor of Mississippi Boulevard Christian Church here in Memphis, Tennessee. I am the founder and president of the Black Clergy Collaborative of Memphis, Tennessee. And I am humbled to be the chair of the steering committee of the African American Clergy Collective of Tennessee, who have called us together on this evening. As we begin tonight, I hope you are tuned in. There will be brief summary statements around each issue. And on this evening, we will begin talking about education, access, and quality. We're grateful for our brother in Chattanooga, Tennessee, Reverend Dr. Terry Ladd.
Thank you,
He's going to
Dr.
open us up on this
Thank you, Dr.
talking about
Turner.
education access.
Thank you, Dr. Turner. I appreciate the opportunity to, as an individual person who has been working in public education and advocate for public education for over 21 years, it really gives me a great pleasure and a really honored to kind of talk about the Black Church agenda as it relates to education access. Research has shown access to quality education creates opportunity for higher education, and those who attain higher levels of education are more likely to live longer and healthier lives. However, marginalized children of color have experienced and are currently experiencing barriers to both quality education and higher education. The African American Collective of Tennessee opposes policies which create barriers to educational success. We believe current public policies in the state of Tennessee some of them are a potential threat to a quality public K-12 education. The policies include Tennessee's new public school funding formula, the Tennessee Investment in Student Achievement, also known as TISA. Dr. Monica Brown will share more about TISA later on tonight. School vouchers, which support using public money to fund private schools, further tapping into underfunded public schools. And last but certainly not least, the Hillsdale College's influence on public education in Tennessee. Hillsdale College president's disparaging remarks about teachers and his plan to open 50 charter schools in Tennessee, both are deeply troubling. Ultimately, we know these policies are part of a corporate plan for privatization of public schools in Tennessee at the expense of our children. History records ancient cultures often devaluing and demeaning children, casting them off and viewing them as commodities. During slavery, Black children were denied access to education. And in this present age, systems of oppression are still denying Black children access to a quality education. Black churches and Black colleges, Black leaders and Black legislators, Black entertainers and Black entrepreneurs. Let's work together to ensure access to a quality education for all Tennessee children.
So thank you, Dr. Ladd. We will hear more about what the TISA funding looks like. Dr. Ladd has given us a primer into what it is to think about education access and quality. My responsibility on this evening is to talk about the neighborhood and built environment, particularly around gun violence, as a public health emergency. Because in this day and time, we have access to many of the incidents that happen in our communities, as well as the various statistics that will talk about and chronicle gun violence in our communities. I think it's important that we address this matter of gun violence, not just for how it affects all people, particularly how it's affecting Black lives. And we believe that gun violence must be seen as a public health emergency. If we only allow this to be a public safety issue, this is something that's going to be handled by law enforcement agencies as well as the criminal justice system. But we believe that if we allow this to take place, to only be a public safety issue, it's going to continue to perpetuate the incremental genocide of African Americans in this state and even across the country. We know we live in a state where there is legalized permitless carry. And we recognize that the odds for more comprehensive gun control at this time are slim to none. However, we cannot capitulate or give up because the odds are not in our favor. This past General Assembly, African American Clergy Collective of Tennessee proposed a bill that would make gun violence a public health emergency. And here are a number of the things, particularly 4 things that we brought to the table in this piece of legislation that our health department, as well as TBI, would work to track hotspots. And as they track hotspots would help us determine where resources would be directed where needed. Secondly, this legislation talked about how we would fund and program conflict resolution that would be meted out on the community level and even in the schools. The third thing that we were looking for was a hospital-based intervention program to be implemented in those hotspot communities, that when there are issues of aggravated assault or gun violence, and there are survivors, and even those who are fatalities, we wanted their families and those who make up the community to have access to an intervention program that would stop the cycle of violence. And then we talked about what it would mean to implement across our educational system gun safety programs. And so gun violence is something that is pervasive, not just in African-American communities, but across our country. And we hope that just as COVID-19 has ravaged our country and there's been a public health response to it, that as gun violence poses a threat to the public health of our community, of our cities, of our state, and even our nation, that lawmakers would do their level best to respond in kind and make sure gun violence is considered a public health emergency. At this moment, I want to call upon the executive director of the African American Clergy Collective of Tennessee, Dr. Shirley Bondin, who will talk to us about healthcare and access to quality.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us tonight. The priority that I'm going to discuss probably is the one that has the clearest path to success, and the one that our state legislators have chosen not to follow. And that is to expand Medicaid. We know Medicaid has been expanded in many other states. There are 12 now that have not expanded Medicaid. And so we know how successful the program has been. If we were to expand Medicaid, 339 Tennesseans would be covered by insurance that they currently do not have. There are over 100,000 Tennesseans who have no clear path to insurance. They are the working poor. And when we say the working poor, that means they have jobs, but they are ineligible for Medicaid because their jobs pay them higher than that limit. But then they are ineligible for the premiums. So they are the working poor. They are our neighbors, our friends, our family members. Not only can we improve the health of our communities and our people, we could save money by expanding Medicaid. Tennessee, the state legislator has chosen to leave, and it depends on who you speak to, anywhere from $900 million to $2.1 billion on the table by not expanding Medicaid. It just seems there's just a lack of consciousness and concern for our people, but also for the bottom line of our state. I'd like to tell you a short story about an individual, and that individual is myself. A couple of years ago, I had to have a hip replacement, and I was unemployed. My husband is employed, and I'm covered under his insurance. That hip replacement cost $28,000. So just imagine if you had not had insurance, that would bankrupt a family or an individual. And even with insurance, before they would replace my hip, I was in great pain, I had to pay $6,000 upfront, even with insurance. So just think about the working poor that I just talked to you about. Even the smallest medical emergency will place them at a financial disadvantage. We must expand Medicaid. We must do all that we can to convince our legislators that Medicaid expansion is necessary. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Bondin. I think it is spot on how easy expanding Medicaid is and how important it is, particularly as we deal with those who fall in the coverage gap during these days. And so far on this evening, we've talked about education, we've talked about gun violence, we've talked about healthcare. But what can we say about the social and community context, particularly as it relates to criminal justice reform? We are grateful for the work and the advocacy of one who has been so important, not just in our state, but particularly in Knoxville, and I believe important for our world. I'm glad that he could join us across the pond. Reverend Calvin Taylor Skinner is going to share with us about criminal justice reform.
Thank you, Reverend Turner. Again, I am Calvin Taylor Skinner. My wife and I are bicontinental, representing both Knoxville, Tennessee, and Cambridge, United Kingdom. In 2021, along with Dr. Turner and Dr. Fisher, we were inducted into Morehouse College's Martin Luther King Jr.'s College of Ministers and Laity. And we were charged to follow the moral and ethical example of the namesake of the board. And not even a week later, in that spirit, while protesting the murder of Anthony Thompson Jr., a group of us Anthony Thompson Jr. was a high school student at Austin East High School in Knoxville, murdered by police. And in our response, in our protests, a group of us were arrested for speaking out and speaking against this unjust death. And from this experience, I'm seeing firsthand the structural issues around criminal justice, such as racial profiling, police brutality, over-criminalization, mass incarceration, and recidivism. And the urgency for especially our church community to respond. And according to the Prison Police Initiative, Tennessee is 20% higher than the national average when it comes to incarcerating its residents. And of course, Black people are overrepresented in that number. And if Tennessee was a country, we have a higher incarceration rate than Russia and China combined. Therefore, that urgency to respond and to address and to bring about reform in our criminal justice system is quite prudent. And to even recognize that there are other departments responsible beyond the courts, the police, and corrections, that there's an inroads to address criminal justice reform through the Department of Children's Services, the Commission on Children and Youth, the Department of Health, the Department of Mental Health and Substance Abuse Services, that we can glean from the best practices nationally and internationally to disrupt what we are seeing in our state. Therefore, let us affirm the scripture that is found in Isaiah 1. Learn to do good, seek justice, and correct oppression. And let us be the representative of that divine community that uplifts justice, especially for our people. God bless y'all.
Thank you, Reverend Skinner. Just put so well. And then lastly, as we move from education, gun violence, healthcare, criminal justice, we have to talk about economic stability. And I'm going to call upon Dr. Daryl Coleman, who has joined us to talk to us about Blue Oval, the guaranteed income, the federal job guarantee.
Thank you, Chair Turner, and to all of you that are here. We're just excited about this opportunity. But as we look now at the future of African Americans, we must realize we must move beyond financial literacy to the acquisition and development of wealth. That so often we've been more concerned about sharing how we can discipline and budget and do those things, which allow us to get good credit scores, to stay in debt, rather than dealing with those principles that help us to acquire wealth in which to build a community. One of the most awesome projects that's going on now in Tennessee is the project of Blue Oval that's coming into Tennessee. Ford is about to build an entire city in rural West Tennessee. They're making an investment of $5 billion. And because we're wise now and understand economic principles, we understand that $5 billion worth of investment translates into $20 to $25 billion of economic revenue that begins to be created because of that investment. Not only are we talking about the Oval City, but we're talking about all of the ancillary pieces. We're talking about daycares, which churches should be looking at doing as a part of the education program. We're looking at job opportunities as they build communities. We're looking at affordable housing because they're bringing in new persons to be employed. We're talking about all kinds of service businesses that we can be involved in, things that our churches can be involved in. One of the biggest pieces would be transportation from the Memphis area and from the Jackson area to the site. Our churches have vans, and we can begin to build coalitions where we then begin to provide the transportation to get key contracts to be able to develop and then move from there. So there are so many opportunities that come with this, and we must recognize the importance of it. But to do so, we must stay aware of what they are doing in terms of Blue Oval. We must stay aware of legislative issues, because realize now, and this is a true statement given to me by one of our representatives, that now Ford Blue Oval has become our new governor because they dictate now political policies for Tennessee. When Blue Oval decided they were going to unionize a red state who had said they were totally against, and a governor who would never allow it, voted totally to then go and allow it to happen. So we must now recognize these opportunities to ally with that. We must also recognize what's coming in from the north in terms of this new development that's going to change the whole demographics of rural West Tennessee, that might change it from one partisan persuasion to another. So we must begin to look at all of the impact of this and how this begins to relate to policies and to wealth and to building wealth in our community, which can spread and begin to deal with us creating the new Black Wall Streets and other streets in our communities. So we're just excited now to continue to look at what's going on and how we can begin to take advantage in so many ways of the wealth that's being built in Tennessee. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Dr. Coleman, for sharing with us about the economic stability aspect of crafting this agenda. And those of you who might be logging on now, we want you to invite others. If you haven't shared already, share this on your page, tag somebody to join into this discussion. Tennessee, if we are not careful, is taking a retrogressive turn. And it's so very important that we do our part to make sure that we don't go back, but that we move forward towards equity, forward towards justice. And I need all of us to be a part of that particular push. There'll be opportunities for discussion, but we're grateful for two of our presenters who are going to hone in on education and on the economy. We don't want you to miss it. And so I'm going to present the first of our presenters on this evening. She is a social justice policy researcher and transformative servant committed to building culturally responsive learning experiences that empower people and cultivate a growth mindset for social justice advocacy. She's guided by the sentiments that serving others is the ultimate act of love, and that, get this, quality education is the ultimate civil right. Her parents instilled in her a love of community and learning, which she cherishes and serves as the foundation for her collaborative work ethic. For most of her life, she has dedicated her efforts to researching, to creating, implementing, and evaluating innovative educational programs that support and advance equity for both educational institutions and community organizations. Her approach merges research-based methodologies with common sense engagement practices, designing programs to support community initiatives, educational needs, and/or policies is something that she thoroughly enjoys. She has served as a secondary teacher, a district coordinator of federal programs, a governing charter school board member, and executive director for a charter school. She also conducts research and collects data on varied educational facets to improve accountability initiatives. She has published articles and a book chapter in the areas of school finance policy, state-level budgeting systems, and culturally responsive leadership practices and preparations. She believes that knowledge is power, and through vital engagement, community discussions, and other educational modalities, level of civic literacy can and will be increased along with the fundamental principles of democracy. I would that you would welcome Dr. Monica Willis Brown, as she shares with us about public education funding formulas.
Thank you so much. And thank you, Dr. Bondin, for inviting me. And good evening, everybody. I'm just going to jump on into it. I've noticed, and one of the things that I like to do is look at the comparison of different state funding models. And Tennessee, like many states in the South, have not changed their funding models in over 30 years. South Carolina changed theirs a few years ago on a just scrabbled on a piece of I think they went to Popeyes, and they decided to put a new finance program together to educate and fund the children. So when you have legislators that have that approach to school funding, you see why we are pretty much in the condition that we're in. But education is a state responsibility, and states must plan for and deliver a system for free, equitable public education. States have the responsibility to equalize that school funding based on the locality's fiscal capacity to pay for educational programs. And for the most part, schools are administered at the local level. I don't know if I can share my screen, but I have been able to share the presentation with you all. And the very first thing that I wanted to do was to provide a current overview of where we are in Tennessee. Tennessee's 20% African American, and the expenditures right now are at $10,971 per pupil. Now, I've also included, because I think it's important for us to see the variance, because just because that is the state average doesn't mean that is that's what every school system receives. So one of the things that with this TISA, with the Tennessee Investment for Student Achievement, the new model that I'll just get deeper into has moved to it's called a student-based funding formula. And there are several different type of funding formulas, but Tennessee has moved from a resource base that focus heavily on property tax, sales tax, and those type things to fund the schools. And we already know if you don't have a FedEx in your location, or if you don't have, I'm hearing y'all talking about what's this, the blue oval. If you don't have initiatives like that, then that can impact this. It's going to be much different than a rural area that does not have any of those type of resources coming in. So now Tennessee has moved to a model that is really focused on educating the student, where you will now move from having a wavering, if you will, base model to having a standard where everybody is going to at least get the same amount of money starting out. And we'll talk about that in just a second. But K-12 is funded through local, state, and federal contributions. And how much money is in your area is really going to determine how much money goes to these schools. And one of the things that I thought that I questioned as I was preparing to be a school administrator, district leader, was if we're not in California, you don't have a Proposition 13 or anything that says property taxes have to go to particular areas, then why shouldn't we not just distribute the funds equally? And that has been an uphill battle that we as Black people have endured for a very long time. But often state policy specifies how funding would be distributed to school districts. In your packet of information, I have included a TISA calculator, which I think is important when you're looking at the populations. The school population is extremely important because some of this new policy is going to be contingent upon how many people you have, what type of services they need, and things of that nature. So we know that federal funds are not that much. I think it's about maybe $1,100 that Tennessee receives, or actually incorporates within the school district each year, whereas the state, the bulk of the money comes from the state and the local entities, and the state and local really is about on par with one another. So now they're moving with the new Tennessee, with the TISA, they're saying that it's going to be a 70-30 split, which I think is going to be, we'll see how that turns out, but next year is going to be the year. So as advocates, I would say, and I'm just going to go ahead and put that out there. Now I was going to save it to the end, but I got to say it now because this is what I believe in democracy. This is a good time for us to, and I say us because I'm with y'all today, so I'm down with y'all. I'm one of y'all. So even though I'm in Georgia, I think it's an awesome time to establish some accountability plans so that you can watch these models before they get implemented into the schools. So what does TISA, and you have, I think there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 districts in the state of Tennessee that have more than 50% of Black students in them. And when you look at the total spending, they range anywhere from $9,000 in Fayette. I think Fayette County Public Schools is like 96, 97 that was spent last year in spending to Humboldt City Schools that receives about 12,000. So remember, I talked about that average. So even though you have an average, there are some school districts that's going to receive more, and some is going to receive less based on what the actual contributions are in that area at the time. So so you guys had the basic education program. That was something that was in place based on the research that I conducted for 30 years. And it received a lot of criticism because it wasn't that equitous. And so what the new TISA plan was supposed to do was to create an opportunity so that now you're not focusing on revenue coming in, but you're actually focusing and creating a formula that's specified and targeted to meet the needs of the student. And so provisions of the legislation lay out the new reporting requirements for school districts and school boards. So school board meetings are important. If you have somebody in your church or your community who just like going to school board meetings, this is an awesome time to create an accountability model to establish so that they know they can check those I's and dot those T's. Dot those I's and cross the T's. All right, so, and the process for how the state will determine a local community's fiscal capacity or ability to raise local funds are going to be vital. So you want to make sure that you really pay attention as community leaders to exactly how much revenue are coming into the system. And it doesn't hurt, because I will sit down with our tax county assessor, especially with the way taxes have been beating people upside the head lately. We're paying enough for our children to receive well above an adequate and fair share in equitable education. So prior to, you had the basic education plan. There was no base amount. And like I said, it wasn't considered that to be that equitable. And you're moving into the Tennessee Investment for Student Achievement that has a student-based allocation funding program designed around the needs of the children. And there are 4 components that I think are very important that I want to talk about. The very first thing is that you have your base funding. The base funding provides every student the same strong education foundation. I think that's about $6,000 and something about $6,300 that every student in the state of Tennessee will get. Right now, based on where the number was prior to, is about $5,000. The next level that you're gonna that creates the TISA model is the weighted funding, and that ensures every student's educational needs are met. Now, I'm just going to say this: when people start putting every educational student need, that makes me pause, because there are going to be some instances where even if a district can pay or afford they may not have the person to carry out those services. So there's some things as I'm reading, there's some things that I've highlighted in here, just things to look out for. The next level of a student-based funding formula is direct funding, and it offers students additional educational opportunities, whether that be paying for the ACT or providing additional STEAM programs. I know that in Chattanooga, and I can't remember the name of the county, but I know that there's a new media program that I was just privy to, and I am definitely into technology and media arts for students, and so I know that that's coming, but that's expensive. When you start talking about camera equipment and things of that nature, those aren't your average art supplies. So when the funding has to match what the strategic plans are, which is why the school boards, it's crucial to have someone in those seats who understand strategic planning and how to budget to support those strategic plans. And then the final part of the framework for the new TISA is outcomes-based funding, and it incentivizes. Now, this is the part that really is concerning to me. It incentivizes achievement and excellence. Now, I don't know what that growth model looks like yet, because there are some things that they indicated they're still working out, and they're trying to make sure that they are in place. But when you start talking about student achievement, growth is important. And if you can't measure growth, then I think, to me, that's code, if you will, for not necessarily funding districts the way that they should be funded. And those are the things when as you know, we're working in this for almost 30 years now, and we've seen quite a bit. But your governor has indicated that he has increased educational spending by $9 billion. 6 of that is going to the base funding. Almost 2 is going to the weight funding that we just talked about. And the direct funding is about $376 million, and then the outcomes funding is $100 million. So if I could just give you a summary, let me just read this to you. Again, the base funding is going to be for every student in the state of Tennessee. You're going to have $6,860 per pupil. That is the base. And based on there's going to be a 25%. The 25% weight, which is the next level, will be additional about $1,700 that will assist students, especially those students who come from economically disadvantaged situations. And right now, with inflation, all of us are in economically disadvantaged situations, okay? There's going to be additional $500 for every student in grades K through 3. Additional $500 for per pupil for 4th grade literacy tutoring programs, and $100 million in outcomes-based funding that would award bonuses to districts based on whether a student is reading on grade level by 3rd grade. Now, I know you were talking about, I think, Brother Skinner, you were discussing the criminal justice model, and we all know that 3rd grade is where stuff starts popping off, if I can just say it like that. All type of alignments are made. If a child is not able to read by their 3rd grade, then they have all different type of directions in which they want to place these children. And so a strong literacy program is they need it, we need it, and I don't think it's not enough money, if you ask me. But the final thing about this, like I said, the state and local governments will split the cost of the base and weights of the formula 70-30. But how much each specific local government will contribute to its public schools will be determined by an annual review of local funding capacity. Now, that is a big question mark. So even though that is a very brief, and I know for the sake of time, I want to make sure that I kept to my time, but I know that is a very brief review, but you all have, and I think I've tried to make it where it's very, you have the notes and everything that I have access to. I also put a few reference points at the end, resources that you could go back and play around with. And I thought that the calculator was really strong, because having a district with over 100,000 students versus 1,000 students is going to be really impactful to how much money these children can receive. And if you're looking at that, and if you look at, I think it's the 4th slide that I've given, you can see just the variance in total population of our African American students by these counties. So like Shelby County is like 110,000, and then you have a Haywood or Humboldt County that has less than 3,000 students. So yes, this is going to be impactful, but the Tennessee Investment of Student Achievement, we'll be hopeful and prayerful that there are going to be some awesome changes that will come as a result of that. But remember, you all went from a resource-based funding structure to now a student-based funding structure, and the components of those student funding structures are the base funding, the weighted funding, the direct funding, and then your it was one more.
Outcomes
funding. See, somebody was paying attention in class. That's right. So there you go. So thank you very much for your time. If there are any questions that we have, I'll be more than happy to assist.
Yes. Dr. Brown and Dr. Ladd, I want to open up the floor for questions. Those of you who are online, type them into the comment section. Those of you who are with us on Zoom, you can place those in the chat as well. I want to get the conversation going. You closed by talking about a resource-based funding model versus a student-based funding model. And so for those of us who are novices about how educational funding takes place, if you can break that down in layman's terms, because there might be a parent, there might be a parent who's part of the PTA who needs to understand what has happened in Tennessee as it relates to public education funding.
Dr. Ladd, do you want to begin?
No, you can begin, and I want to follow up with the question of my own about your breakdown, because I thought it was excellent.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. But when we talk about resource-based funding, and that's what this is what's going on right now, because again, this won't even take place until 23-24, where they'll roll out into the student-based model. But your local taxes, how much you pay in the sales tax, your property tax, that is what creates your resource-based, your base model. Now, that's when things get a little funny, if you will, because for me, I'm like, if I'm in a county and I'm paying taxes, I feel like if I'm paying 40% of my funds are going to the public schools, then it shouldn't matter what school. It shouldn't be just because a school is in my backyard, because I'm in Atlanta Metro. I have 5 elementary schools in my backyard. So who's to say which school gets the most money? Now, I'm going to tell you something else to watch. And we didn't even get into Title I funds. We didn't even get into federal funds yet. I'm curious as to how this new federal funding is going to be impacted. Are there going to be more resources? Are there going to be less? Now, I don't know if you all have discussed the American Rescue Plan Act that really dumped a ton of money into schools and communities. But with that, if you're dealing with resource funding, the schools should have seen an influx based on all that money that was coming into the community. They should have seen an influx of spending. So this, not having adequate PPE, not having adequate books, not having adequate ventilation, we should not be here. Not having adequate teachers, because the issue of teacher preparation is a whole nother conversation that I would love to, I think as a community of faith, we really need to address. But and just how teachers come to be, because if you're not equipped to teach the child, then how's the child going to expand? And if you're not in a school where they're focusing on the 5 components of literacy, everybody can't focus on sight words. And that's something that I'm finding in the Black community that is, but that's my other edge. We're talking about resource funding, so I had to stick to that. So, but I was going to say, but with the resource model, now what they're saying, moving to the student-based funding, everything is going to be centered towards the needs of the child and or the school. So, that part.
Well, I think you make it clear. You make it clear.
Okay.
You laid it out clear. And I know Dr. Ladd has a question. I'm concerned, and I hope others who are watching are concerned, particularly about the 4th part of this formula. It's about outcomes and economically disadvantaged communities. You have the research.
You're addressing my question. That's
you go ahead.
That's one of the 2 issues I had with TISA. Is the outcomes based formula part of that, and also initially they were going to review it every year, but initially they were only going to review it like every 3 years.
That's what they said. That's right.
We advocated for them that's ridiculous for you to go 3 years without evaluating your funding formula. So at least good news is they at least changed that. But that's because you got to watch them. And that's because and we have to remain vigilant about, because they'll sneak something. This whole TISA process, we suggested it go through summer session to do some more research on it. They rushed it through without it really working all the kinks of it. So that's why we still have these unanswered questions as it relates to the TISA funding and how it's going to impact our communities. But you've done an excellent job of it. I've sat in on many of these, and you've done the best job of kind of breaking that down and making it more simplistic about, what. Also, I want you to address the accountability piece. You said we should have those measures in place. Could you kind of suggest some accountability measures that you've seen in the past that will, because that's another important part of this whole TISA funding formula?
Well, praise God. I thank you so much for that, brother. Well, one of the things that I think with the accountability is, first of all, really sitting down with these school board members, because what I've seen, just because and I don't know if it's a partisan, a non-partisan, how your school boards are elected. But one of the things that is concerning to me is that you have a lot of people on the school board who necessarily don't know budgeting 101, common sense budgeting. And to me, and if you're on a board, you are responsible for, in some cases, $1 billion worth of people's tax dollars. So one of the things that I would like to do is go, and everybody's not gonna be able to do it, but we have one thing God did bless our people with is intellectual capacity. We're some smart people. And one of the things is connecting those strategic plans to the if you say you have an aggressive strategic plan, how much, put your money where your mouth is. And if you say you're going to support a reading initiative and your students are not reading, and based on what I've seen, Tennessee is 40% below the reading proficiency based on the on NAEP scores. And so that's coming from 4th, 8th, and 12th grade. And so if you say you want to support literacy, then we should see that the bulk of those funds go to literacy. Also, which is why I stress having one of the other accountability models is, first of all, tracking how much spending is going towards instruction, how much you're actually paying teachers. And I did not put it on there, but I do have that. I have a lot of info. I think the average is for paying teachers is $61,000 in the United States, and in Tennessee, I think the average is $52,000 right now as of last year. So we're under the federal level. So you get what you pay for. We really do. And I know one of the things that was mentioned in TISA was to go towards teacher salaries, but I just don't see how that is going to come into the equation. So there are some variables that are just question marks. And one of the things because I pay attention, right now, I don't know, like in Georgia, we experienced a really nasty redistricting battle. And so this rushing legislation through does not work for me. And it does not work for most of us because we end up coming up with a short end of the stick. So I'm going to stick on this because as I was reading, I said, this is really interesting. And when you talk about school resource models, I think some of your more... Let me also say this, accountability. Tennessee right now is 45th in spending, okay, overall spending in the nation, 45th. So even though your governor may put $9 billion, what I've seen, and the numbers don't lie, the states who put money towards educating their students, the students are flourishing. So unless we're talking about, and that's why I wanted to make sure that everybody had the average, unless we're almost getting to a place where there's a at least $17,000 going towards students, how are we gonna move that needle? And this is just being real. And one thing about it, people don't mind paying taxes when it comes to the children. No. So I y'all let me know if it's my time. So but the school board, the strategic plans, and having someone really mirror those strategic plans with those accountability, and I have some other ideas, but I really want to see how I want to play around a little bit more with those weights, especially the weighted funding, because that's those weights, leaving it up to chance per each district, that does not work for me. You can't say we have state legislative and then turn around and then give everybody, oh, but you can do your own thing. No. We need some. And so that's another accountability. And it's a good thing that you all are together so that you can assess what's going on in each district. And the more you talk to one another, the more you see, which is how we ended up finding out some wild stuff was going on with redistricting. We were able to talk to different counties. But if you stay in your same space and you're not really communicating with people across the state or just next door, it makes a difference. So that's another accountability component that I would use, and that's just base level. But as this grows, we'll get deeper.
Well, Dr. Finch just mentioned something, and what happened here in Chattanooga, they actually, what I believe it's statewide, you actually had to declare it's no longer nonpartisan running for school board. That's the first thing. The second thing is that there's an intentionality about getting those school board seats in order to dictate that funding model. So those people, those entities that are against the public schools, they have a plan, and it's systematic, and we've got to continue to. That's why I thank God for you so much tonight in helping us kind of unpack all this and helping us develop a system that we can, that we can be advocates for our children and make sure that they have accountability for making sure that all children flourish and not just some.
Yes,
That is awesome.
We could talk about this all night. Like, this is eye-opening, and I hope I'm listening, and I feel like the character that Lawrence Fishburne played in School Days and just hollering, "Wake up!" Because we have this TISA formula. We haven't even talked about the vouchers and what that's going to do to public education. So wake up, Tennessee. Wake up, Black Tennesseans.
If I can say one thing about a voucher, as the Black church, I think we probably need to look at vouchers a little differently and be prepared, because a lot of times we're reactive instead of proactive, right? Mm-hmm. And so one of the things that I've been thinking about is any event that, and I almost don't want to say it, but any event that vouchers do pass, I'm sure many of you have educational buildings in your building. And that's all I'm going to say. Hello.
I lead a congregation that had a Christian academy, African-American run. But, because of the funding at that time, we couldn't sustain it. It might create an opportunity. However, I do look at how public school districts are going to be impacted because of these, I'm trying to say it in the nicest way as possible, these private schools that were created really because of white flight. And they're prevalent in Shelby County.
Amen.
They're prevalent.
And
in Chattanooga too.
Yes.
Numbers going down. I don't know about y'all, but have you noticed the numbers going down in the public school systems and as a result of COVID? Now you're talking about flight.
Yeah.
So now you're changing a funding structure that is based on student enrollment when the enrollment is going down.
Yeah.
That's a great
So Dr. Brown, Dr. Ladd, I want to thank y'all. Y'all have, I hope, and awakened somebody who's been asleep, and I hope churches, we're gonna work at the state level, but I hope churches are organizing their members to go to school board meetings. I hope fraternities are deputizing committees and sororities are organizing committees to go to school board meetings and county commission meetings to sit in and hear what is happening with this funding, because that's where our future is being determined. That's where the cradle to prison pipeline, right, is being determined. And so we need to show up as it relates to public education. And so we could keep talking about it. This is the first of many. We're going to craft an agenda. We're going to set policy, and we're going to mobilize ourselves to work towards the ends that we're seeking. Dr. Brown, thank you so much for being with us. Dr. Ladd, thank you for presenting. Y'all have opened our eyes. You've awakened our conscience. On this evening as well, we wanted to have a discussion about something that we've heard in the media that we need to get more information about to understand the economic impact of. And that's something that used to be called the Memphis Megasite, but now it's called Blue Oval. And we're grateful to have a gentleman who's a native of Chattanooga, Tennessee, who serves as the Senior Advisor for Economic Opportunities for Mayor Tim Kelly. He oversees the City of Chattanooga's work in the areas of economic development, entrepreneurship, workforce development, and affordable housing. Prior to taking on this role, he served in various capacities in the previous mayoral administration, including Deputy Chief of Staff, Director of Economic Programs, and Civic Engagement Coordinator. Before he took on work in the government, he worked in various positions in the public and private sector. He happened to go to that school where you can tell who they are, but you can't tell them much, Morehouse College.
Amen.
I'll let it slide on tonight. He has a master's degree in business from University of Tennessee at Chattanooga. He has an MBA from UT Chattanooga. I'm grateful that he consented to be with us tonight. Let's welcome Jermaine Freeman. Tag somebody, share this. They need to be a part of this discussion that's happening right now. Thank you, Mr. Freeman.
Hey, thank you, Mr. Turner. I appreciate you. I appreciate it. It's always good to see people from Chattanooga on the call. So big ups to my man and Morehouse brother, Dr. Terry Ladd. Always good to see you, sir.
Good to see you too, my brother.
Thank you. And then always good to see Representative Hakeem, who represents Chattanooga as well. So good to see. He doesn't have his camera on, but it's always good to talk to Representative Hakeem. So as Mr. Turner introduced me, I'm Jermaine Freeman. I work in the office of Mayor Tim Kelly here in the city of Chattanooga, and I oversee economic development for Chattanooga. And so I want to sort of talk a little bit about the opportunity that Blue Oval is going to bring for West Tennessee, and some of the things that you guys need to be aware of, because there are going to be significant impacts from the project. And I want to sort of share some of the things that we've learned from having Volkswagen here in Chattanooga. So back in 2008, Volkswagen decided to open its first automotive facility, its first and only automotive facility in the United States in Chattanooga. And so that Chattanooga plant joined their plant in Puebla, Mexico, as their two North American automotive facilities. And so when Volkswagen came, obviously we were very excited. We had put a lot of public money, both the city and county with help from the state, into creating a new industrial park for Volkswagen called Enterprise South. And we were fortunate to be able to have Volkswagen declare that they were going to come to Chattanooga and be an anchor tenant for the industrial park, which was great. Fast forward in time, Volkswagen's presence has been tremendous. I cannot underscore or underestimate the number of jobs and the opportunities that having those jobs will create for regular everyday people who are in need of work. So for people in your communities that are underemployed or unemployed, there will be significant job opportunities that will come as part of this Blue Oval project. And so Ford will obviously hire a number of people directly, but what you all have to remember is it's not just going to be Ford. Just as when Volkswagen came to Chattanooga, Volkswagen also brought a number of their automotive suppliers to Chattanooga too. And so whether it was Plastic Omnium or Gestamp or Chattanooga Seating Systems, all of those companies sort of followed Volkswagen, and then they created a number of jobs as well. And so when you're talking about the potential for job creation in West Tennessee, you are going to see really a tremendous number of jobs created, and it's going to be extremely important to ensure that your workforce is ready to take advantage of those jobs. And so those are really the challenges where That's really the challenge where you're going to need to focus, in my opinion, is really in workforce. I cannot underscore enough how important workforce development is. It is a challenge that we still struggle with here in Chattanooga, even though Volkswagen has now been here for about 14 years at this point. But the workforce challenges are going to be real. And so to the extent that we as an African American community can make sure that African American people can take advantage of those jobs, that's going to be really important. And so what do I mean? So there are a couple of things that you really want to be considerate of and be mindful of when it comes to workforce needs. One is you want to make sure that there are ample job training processes that people can take advantage of so that they can get the training that they need to be successful on the job from day one. When you design some of those job training exercises, whether it's Ford or whether it's one of your suppliers, you want to make sure that that job training is representative of what the actual work environment is going to be like. So if the work environment is going to be in a manufacturing environment, you don't want all the job training to be in a comfortable classroom, right? You want people to have to come to work and to work in a manufacturing environment so that they can see it, so that they can taste it, so that they can understand exactly what they're walking into from day one. The other thing that is really going to be important, and this is not touched on enough, is the wraparound support that's going to be needed for a number of the people that come to work there. And so if you think about populations of people who may currently be unemployed or underemployed, they may be unemployed or underemployed for a reason. And in a lot of cases, they will need certain types of wraparound support to be able to be successful in terms of getting a job at Ford or at one of the suppliers. So it's not enough, and it will not be sufficient for local communities to think about workforce just in terms of connecting individual A with job A at Ford. You will also need to provide wraparound services and have systems that provide some sort of wraparound support for those individuals who are going to take advantage of those jobs. Some of the folks that you that are going to get hired are people who, they may have struggles or things that they're working through or challenges that they work through. And so to the extent that you can have your nonprofit sector as well as Ford or whatever employer is working with them, to the extent that you can have buy-in from all of these organizations to provide some of those wraparound services, that's going to be really important. And two of the wraparound services that I'll segue to here in just a second are going to be childcare and transportation. Childcare and transportation are critical in order to make sure that you have a workforce that can take advantage of the job opportunities that come. Everything that I'm telling you are things that we have learned the hard way from having Volkswagen here. And the Ford and the Blue Oval project is going to be 3 times the size of the investment that Volkswagen made. So that means that your problems and your challenges are going to be 3 times the scale of our problems and challenges. And so I want to sort of hammer that home because it's going to be critical that if you really want Black people that live in urban communities to be able to take advantage of these jobs, like you've got to address some of the wraparound services that they'll need in terms of workforce development. And that includes childcare and transportation. But I'll come back to those things in just a minute. But to go back to workforce, the other thing to really think about is when VW first came here, they were very, very particular about hiring people that had committed certain types of crimes in their criminal background. And they had a very sort of stringent policy on hiring people who had committed, almost any crime in the past 7 years. And so as we think about some of our community members who may have had interactions with the justice system, who have been justice involved or have had interactions in the criminal justice system, it's going to be critical to work with Ford and their supplier community to make sure that they have systems in place where they can hire and extend job opportunities to people who have paid their debt to society and are trying to turn their lives around. And that was one of the challenges that we also encountered with Volkswagen early on, is sort of a rigidness, I'll say, in terms of their approach to sort of saying, hey, if applicant A, had a drug infraction 5 years ago, they were willing to disqualify that person. Now, because workforce has become so critical, Volkswagen has evolved and they've become much more willing to be a little bit more flexible. But it's taken a number of years for them to get to that point. Obviously, many of our communities are seeing real workforce challenges, sort of, in a post-COVID world. Volkswagen is no exception to that. And when Ford comes online and when their suppliers come online, they will be doing so in a post-COVID world. So I anticipate that they will have some of those same workforce challenges. So just think about that when it comes to hiring people who have been justice involved or had interactions with the criminal justice system. But let me go back to child care and transportation for just a second. One of the key things that's going to be really important is, Ford is going to be an automotive, it's obviously an automotive manufacturing facility. There are going to be men and women that work there, and they will all need child care help. They will not only need child care help for their first shift, but I imagine that Ford will run multiple shifts around the clock. So it will be critical to make sure that there are child care options, preferably on site near the Ford facility or near the supplier park, where parents can drop off kids, whether they work first shift, second shift, third shift. It's going to be critical to make sure that you can establish child care services to be able to help parents around the clock. Because again, if parents don't have adequate child care and they work second shift or they work third shift, they're not going to stay on the job. They're not going to stay on the job because they're not going to be able to have some place to drop off their child when they go to work. And so it's just going to be too difficult. The other thing to keep in mind is that for a lot, even though, a lot of, my assumption is that all of these jobs will pay livable wages, but it's also going to be important for the child care to be somewhat subsidized by, some of the employers, or to provide some sort of child care benefit to workers so that they can make sure that they can afford child care. Child care is expensive. We all know that. It's not getting any cheaper, and it's going to be expensive, especially if it's running around the clock 24 hours a day for second and third shifts. And so making sure that parents have the ability to afford childcare is going to be super important. Transportation is the elephant in the room that no one ever discusses, and it's the elephant in the room that everybody needs to discuss. Okay, let me make this very clear. If you do not have adequate public transit systems to get people from point A to point B, and B is the job site, you will not be able to keep people on the job. So that is going to be extremely important to ensure that you have adequate public transit for all of your people. And then the last things that I'll hit on, because I know we're close to time, is there are going to be, with the public infrastructure that has to be built, with the facilities that need to be built for both the original equipment manufacturer, which is going to be Ford, plus their suppliers, there are going to be a ton of construction jobs. So this is also an opportunity to make sure that as you think about workforce, you're also thinking about the construction jobs and people in the construction industry. But also it's going to be good to think about Black businesses that are in the construction industry that can participate as diverse businesses and take advantage of some of those contracts. So not just thinking about African Americans as construction workers, but thinking about African Americans as general contractors, subcontractors, and making sure that you can set diverse business enterprise targets to make sure that there's a certain amount of spend that goes to Black-owned businesses. This is how Atlanta created an entire middle class of African Americans, as Dr. Ladd well knows. It is because former Atlanta Mayor Maynard Jackson was dead set on making sure that African American businesses had the opportunity to participate in procurement opportunities. And this is going to be a huge procurement opportunity in terms of building out the industrial park, and then there are going to be other opportunities to actually build out the public infrastructure, as well as the facilities that will be owned by Ford and the suppliers. So I know that's a lot of information that I threw at you here all at one time. I apologize that I did not have slides, but I literally just walked out of a city council meeting here in Chattanooga. So my apologies. But with that, I'm happy to answer any questions. And Mr. Turner, I'll turn it back over to you.
Hey, thank you. I mean, I know you had a short time span, but I think you laid it out in terms of workforce and some of the work, some of the wraparound things that are going to be needed for this to succeed. And I see this as something not just for West Tennessee, but all Tennesseans to participate in. And I was going to ask you as a leading question about minority contracting, but you closed out there. So I'm not going to go there. Dr. Ladd has a question he's going to raise, and I have a question that came in from Facebook.
So, Jermaine, can you kind of talk about the importance of having a governmental equity, a representative that is an advocate for making sure that this policy, we were very instrumental here in Chattanooga in getting an equity officer who reports directly to the mayor. And we think that that's really going to bring about the mayor's One Chattanooga plan. Could you kind of talk about the importance of that from a local perspective, city perspective, and of carrying out those equity plans, or those closing those equity gaps?
Yes, thank you, Dr. Ladd. So this is the first time in the city of Chattanooga's history where we've had a chief equity officer. Our chief equity officer, Tamara Stewart, as Dr. Ladd mentioned, reports directly to Mayor Kelly. And so having someone who is constantly thinking about how we can be more equitable in every single policy that we try to carry out is extremely important and extremely valuable. Tamara is always going to help us to think critically about how the things that we roll out and the initiatives that we take on, how those are going to impact all of our community members, especially the community members that may sometimes get overlooked for whatever reason. And so it is critical and important. And I applaud Mayor Kelly for creating the position of Chief Equity Officer. Again, this is the first time, to my knowledge, that the city has ever had a Chief Equity Officer. And then elevating the position so that the Chief Equity Officer is considered sort of a C-suite type role, where the Chief Equity Officer is reporting directly to the mayor or reporting to a chief of staff. Like, that's critically important, because it means that the work of the Chief Equity Officer is not buried, down in your human resources department or some other department. It means that work is elevated and made a priority across all departments. And so that's extremely important and extremely critical.
I think I see a hand from Representative Hakeem.
Thank you, sir, Mr. Chairman. And Jermaine, thank you very much. I agree with everything that Jermaine is saying. I just want to take 1 minute. One of the things that I've been working on with the Department of Corrections and with Volkswagen is an effort to get our people who are incarcerated in a position to go right into a job as they get out of the institution. Now, we don't know what that's going to look like right now. We're trying to put together a pilot program. But what we're talking about, it may be they get some training in, it may be just when they come out. But Literally, I put Swaggart in contact with the Department of Correction and vice versa. I'm working with both of them. We're trying to put together this pilot program. So that's another thought that you can put in your arsenal as you move forward with Blue Oval.
So we've got a number of workforce development pieces that we're working on. Thank you for sharing that, Representative Hakeem. I want to, this is so much to discuss in terms of Blue Oval, but I do want to honor the question we did receive from Facebook. And here's the question: the additional developments that will come with that have increased the potential of Black folks being bought out of their land and homes in West Tennessee. What measures are being taken to ensure their protection? So I'm thinking about back to the fight to stop the pipeline, Byhalia pipeline, from coming through Memphis. And one of the things that raised eyebrows is that prior to them claiming eminent domain, they were, quote unquote, paying people for variances, and really not at a rate that speaks to, what these people are going to lose long term. And so I guess I would love to hear if you have any insight into what I discovered early on is that many of these residents who were signing these documents were not given time or access to legal counsel to make these decisions. So the question, I think, is relevant in terms of protections. What measures are being taken to ensure the protection of these Black residents?
Mr. Turner, I assume that question is for me.
Yeah.
Okay, so I don't know sort of what protection is going to be offered for the residents of West Tennessee, and I think that is something that's going to be critically important for the local officials to consider. When Volkswagen came to Chattanooga, Volkswagen came and sort of relocated and located in a large undeveloped piece of property that we converted into an industrial park. There were no residents there. It was not really close to a neighborhood. Even though it's in the city limits, it was a pretty remote area that was heavily wooded. There were deer everywhere, and so it was very much a remote area, and there was no risk of people being displaced. I don't know if that's necessarily the case for West Tennessee. I apologize. It's the opposite end of the state from Chattanooga. But I will say though that displacement is always something that has to be worried about. Representative Hakeem is very aware of a project that I'm working on here in Chattanooga, where we are about to build, a new stadium to catalyze redevelopment in an area that's been blighted for a long time. And the displacement of the surrounding community is something that we're going to have to, worry about. Right now, the site that we have is about 120 acres and no one lives on it. So no one's going to be displaced. But having said that, people's property values will rise over time as the area continues to revitalize. And so one of the things that we're thinking about here in Chattanooga is, in order to kind of prevent people from being priced out of their property that they've owned for a long time, is potentially things like a community land trust, where you have the ability to control the price of land because the land is sort of acquired and held onto by a nonprofit, and then making sure that a lot of our senior residents understand that there are senior tax freeze programs that are permitted by the state to freeze property tax levels for senior citizens that are under a certain income threshold. But those are the things that communities have to contend with anytime there's development. And so that is something that I think is going to be really important for West Tennessee to think about too. I believe the first community land trust, if I recall, was actually started in the state of Georgia, if I'm not mistaken. And it was started to help preserve land and to help preserve affordability for communities in Georgia that were sort of under threat of losing their land and being priced out of the area. So I would certainly recommend, probably exploring the idea of a community land trust. Now, eminent domain is a whole different ballgame, and there are challenges that come with eminent domain just because of the political nature of eminent domain. So to the extent that you can avoid eminent domain, that's good. The other thing that you can also think about is creating a land bank. In Chattanooga, we have the ability to create a land bank. We're actually reinstating ours. The land bank has the ability to go out and sort of acquire property on behalf of the city and to aggregate parcels that we can then use to develop affordable housing or use to promote more economic development. So that's another tool that you can sort of use in the toolbox to help preserve or create more affordable housing.
Jermaine Freeman, thank you for being so resourceful on this evening. I see two hands, but I want to stick to our 8 p.m. deadline. Clifton Harris, Representative Hakeem, could you all quickly kind of get out your questions, your queries? Mr. Freeman might not be able to answer, but I want them for the record.
Okay. I didn't know if
Just
it was on.
with the Urban League and stuff. No, I just wanted to, in addition to what Brother Freeman said, 2 other tools, to put in the toolbox. We got to do a better job, of estate planning with our people so that we can give them the benefit, of the knowledge of what their real estate is really worth and the value of it. And then the second thing is that we got to do a better job, of making sure that they understand the value of their land also allows them to be a part of the development deal and teaching them how to be a part of the deal and not just sell their property. So I'll stop there.
Hey, you're right on point. Representative Hakeem? Unmute. We can't hear you, Representative Hakeem. Could you unmute?
I apologize. Okay. I'm having this coming Thursday with governmental officials and others to look at what's called circuit breaker tax freeze, and of course the senior tax freeze and so forth. People want to stay in some instances in their community. And this development hopefully will have, and it is destined to have, affordable housing. And so we're working on those kinds of things. We're looking at doing some legislation in regards to that. So it may have implications beyond Chattanooga. So that's something, again.
We lost the end of you, but I think you raise a valid point, and we're looking, whatever outcomes, Representative, that you come out with, please let us know. Just want to acknowledge also Representative Jesse Chisholm joined us, and he says that I believe one more thing that the legislature should concentrate on with the Ford deal is making sure that felons can not only get employment, but also on the contract end of the deal. And so there's lots that can be done with Blue Oval. Let me do a few things as we kind of draw to a close. I want to thank those of you who have joined us via Facebook Live. I want to as well acknowledge the National Panhellenic Council, Memphis President Sledge, for being with us on this evening, leaders of the Urban League across the state, NAACP across the state, clergy from across the state, state representatives being a part of this discussion, members of National Action Network committed to be a part of this discussion as well. Let me say this is not the end. We want to see this all the way through. And so in the first week of October, we're looking forward to part 2 of this summit, And I hope you keep your eyes and ears open when we announce the date, we're looking to come together. It is the African proverb that says, if you want to go fast, go alone. But if you want to go far, go together. And y'all in this state, we got to go together. There's no other way. So across churches, across our Black Greek lettered organizations, Masonic lodges, our historic civil rights organizations, and our government officials, we've got to work together in order to craft an agenda that we can move forward together. And so I would, if you want your organization to be a part of upcoming conversations, email us at blackclergytn@gmail.com, blackclergytn@gmail.com, to let us know you want to be a part. It allows us to put you on our email list so you get regular updates of what is happening. If you're watching and your pastor or your clergy organization is not connected, send an email as well to blackclergytn@gmail.com. We're building power. We're mobilizing people, and we want to continue this work that will help us realize a future in this state that is equitable and just, and we want you to be a part of it. And we also look forward to meeting with our members of our Tennessee Legislative Black Caucus soon, as well, as we will move from issue to policy. We've got to work hand in hand. And so I am grateful for your participation on this evening. I am hopeful of our collective work together. Again, if you have not already connected with us, send your information to blackclergytn@gmail.com. Allow me to pray with us as we close on this evening. God of grace and glory, we are grateful for this evening, for the ability to collaborate and to work together towards what you call us to, which is to do justice, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with you.
Yes.
God, we ask for your strength, your divine enablement, that we will not become weary in our well-doing, because we know in due season we're going to reap if we don't give up. And so bless us and keep us so that we might realize change for all of your children. We come asking these things in the name of our liberator and our Lord, our leader, Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen. Amen.
Have a great evening.
Amen.